An elderly woman relates an experience that I actually can relate to as somebody who loses a lot of things. She's leaving the store. She checks for her car keys. She says, "They weren't in my handbag." Suddenly, I realized I must have left them in the car. Frantically, I headed to the parking lot. My husband had yelled at me a little bit a couple of times for leaving my keys in the car's ignition. He's afraid, of course, that the car shouldn't be stolen. As I looked around the parking lot, I realized he was right. The parking lot, it was empty. Immediately, she says, I called the police. I gave them my location. I confessed that I had left my keys in the car, that it had been stolen, and then I made the very difficult decision to call my husband and to confess. I left my keys in the car. It's been stolen, I say. There's a moment of silence. I thought the call had been disconnected, but then I heard his voice. "What, are you kidding me? I dropped you off." Now it's my turn to be silent. Embarrassed, I said, "Well, could you at least come and get me?" To which he responded, "Yeah, I just have to convince this cop that I didn't steal your car." Sometimes we think that something is there when it's really not. We look up to find only absence in that space. And sometimes we want something to be there when it's not. It's true about things, and it's certainly true about people. Today is Yom Kippur. It is our time for Yizkor, our time for feeling the presence deeply of those we love by coming together to remember them in all of the complicated facets that made up the story of their lives, the qualities, the lessons that they taught, the fullness of their being that made up who they are. It is our time for feeling, if we can, through our prayers, the presence in the absence. In the Bible, in our Torah, there's a story about the young King David before he became a king. And David at that time is supposed to attend a very important dinner with the king who was the king at that point, Saul, but he couldn't attend for reasons that I won't get into. And his best friend Jonathan turns to him and says these words in the Hebrew, and I want you to think about them. He says, "Machar chodesh v'nifkadeta ki yipaked moshavecha." Jonathan says to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be remembered, for your seat at the table will be empty. You will be remembered, for your seat will be empty. It's that idea that this sermon is really all about. The empty seats around our tables, those seats that remind us of their presence, that remind us of their goodness, that remind us of their lessons that they taught, the recipes they shared, the jokes they offered, the seats by which our love will always be. It's no small thing. The seat that somebody occupies in this world, it stands for something more. The chair that a person sat in while they were alive, it carries a certain weight. We know not just literally, but figuratively. I remember at my own grandfather's house, my grandfather of blessed memory, he had a chair in the den, and nobody but nobody sat in that chair. You would have to be insane to even think of such a thing. It was molded to the shape of his body from the hours and the days and the years that he spent reading history and reading American history there. We would not dare to sit in his seat. Not just because we didn't want to get into trouble, but out of love, out of respect for who he was, for his place while he lived in this world. It's a very ancient idea, actually. The Talmud, when it talks about the responsibilities that a child has to a parent, when it talks about the responsibilities that we have to our elders, it says, what is morah? What is reverence? Lo yoshev bimkomo. Don't sit in their seat. Don't take their spot. It might seem silly, but it's not. It's another way of saying, show them that you look to them with honor, with reverence, by honoring the space that they take up in this world. It's why even about God, we say in the morning prayers on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, at the start of the whole service, we say God is HaMelech, the King, who is Yoshev al Kisei Ram, sitting on a throne on high. We imagine in that moment of ultimate respect for the creator of the universe, and it's tied into this idea of the seat that God occupies. Fascinating idea. And you see it really throughout Jewish history. Maybe you know of the sect of Hasidim, the Breslov sect. They're one of the many sects of Hasidic groups like Chabad. But unlike Chabad, who have had a lot of Rebbes over the course of the years, this one group, the Breslov group, they had only one Rebbe. It was Rebbe Nachman, if you don't know the name, a genius, insightful, wonderful rabbi, worth looking into. But for this group, he was their only Rebbe, the only one they'll ever have. And when he died, of all the things that his Hasidim thought to remember him by, his chair, which was in the Ukraine, was dismantled piece by piece under threat because it was a time of pogroms and a time of horrible anti-Semitism, and they smuggled it through Russia and then lovingly, piece by piece, carefully, piece by piece, illegally put his chair back together. And you can find it in Israel, in the Breslov Shul. To this very day, over 100 years later, they look to that empty chair that nobody sits in, and they see not an absence, but a presence. They feel not his loss, but all that he offered through the course of his many years, that he sat there and shared his wisdom with them. V'nifkarada ki faked moshavecha, you will be remembered, though your seat will be empty. You understand the presence that is felt even in that absence on Yizkor, at a time of Yizkor. All of us can identify with that image of an empty chair, or in the case of our sanctuary, an empty pew. You know, every year I have the privilege, and sometimes the very difficult and painful privilege, of being with members of our community and their families as they pass from this earth. From your vantage point, every year, you look up at me, and I always basically look the same. Some years I have a beard, some years not. My hair's a little different at times. You always look at me and see basically the same thing. But when I look out at the congregation, as I am right now, for me, every year it's different, because I see those empty seats. I see the places that were once filled by people who were my friends, by dedicated members of our temple, by people who I loved getting to know, and people I'll always remember. People who never sat anywhere but their one spot. And now that spot is no longer occupied by them, and yet I feel their presence still, and I know so many others do as well. All of us in our lives have empty chairs that we think about around the holidays in particular. You sit down to a meal, you sit down at your table at a simcha, at a wedding, at a bar bat mitzvah, when you visit relatives, we think always not just about who is there, but of who used to be there, sharing their stories, sharing their smiles, in many cases sharing their complaints, sharing their love. At every bris, you know, in Jewish tradition, we leave an empty chair on the bima. Did you know that? We call it Kiseh Eliyahu. We call it Elijah's chair. We say, traditionally speaking, that chair is there for Elijah, who's the messenger of redemption, because maybe that child who was just born will be the Messiah. And that's a beautiful idea. But I think there's another reason too. I think it's because even in our moments of joy, even in our moments of celebrating life with new potential and new possibility, there is an empty chair to remind us of all those who came before, to remind us of those who are not present, who would be so proud if they were. An empty chair to signal that this new life should carry, God willing, the values of those who made that new life possible, that empty chair which points us again and again and again to their presence, not their absence. This year, it's not just us as we come to Yizkor, as individual families. I mean, it's not just us remembering the ones we loved, who understand the meaning of an empty chair, because this year in particular, Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, all of us collectively know and have felt in a deep and painful way in our heart of hearts what I'm speaking about this morning. I'll never forget, for as long as I live, the image that I know so many of you saw as well, of a Seder table that was set up in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in what has now become known as Hostage Square. And at that Seder table, if you didn't see it, I'll describe it to you, over 100 plates left untouched, and forks, and knives, and napkins, and next to them, over 100 empty seats that should be filled by loving parents and children and brothers and sisters and grandmothers and grandfathers and friends, but are not. Still, over a year since those innocent, beautiful members of our community were taken from us, stolen from us, there are Rosh Hashanah tables, and there are breakfast tables too, with more empty seats than they should have, seats that should be filled with good, loving, kind, creative people, but are not. You think this year at Yizkor we have to, about all the lives that were so senselessly taken, about the children who were taken. It's not just empty seats we think about this year, it's empty high chairs. And that should break your heart more than anything else I can imagine. And so we say Yizkor this year for all those who have been killed and all those who have been taken. And we ask God for some measure alongside all of them, strength, of unity of purpose, so that we may try somehow as a people to move through this pain. We say Yizkor this year privately. It's true in our own hearts, but we say this year, Yizkor for Am Yisrael. We have lost too much as a people to the senselessness of hatred and of hatred of Jews. You know, when you look at the verse that I've been speaking about from the David story, V'nifkadeta ki yipaked moshavecha, you will be remembered deeply and lovingly, for your seat will be empty. When you really think about that verse in the Hebrew, something very strange about it. I'll point it out to you. The word for empty, nifkadeta, and the word for remembered, yipaked, they're the same Hebrew root. They're basically the same word in Hebrew. That which expresses void, that which expresses something that is no longer there, is the same word as that which is remembered. Why? How can that be? Because our Bible is conveying to us, I think, a very sad irony of life in addition to everything I've said so far. That sometimes, sadly, what it takes for somebody to be remembered is for them to disappear. Sometimes, it's not just when a seat is vacant that people notice, that people start to miss or appreciate fully, because we take people for granted too often. We, in the void of that seat, say, okay, I should have missed you more. I should have appreciated you more. I should have cared about you more while you were here. Just like the absence of, it brings up that sense of closeness and love, the opposite is true too often. And that's a lesson we must take from today, all of us. If Yom Kippur is to remind us of anything, if it's to remind us as we look into our souls of anything through this day, it is the absolute fragility, the ephemeral nature of life. It is the reminder today to strive not to take the time that we are blessed with on this earth for granted, to try, if we can, not to push off a love that we can offer today or an apology that we can offer today for tomorrow, because Yom Kippur and our liturgy and the power of this day and the themes of the Torah reading, all of it remind us nothing in this world is guaranteed. And too often, it does take an empty seat for us to stop and truly appreciate what it is that we loved about the person who sat in it. And that's urgent. That's for right now. Unatana Tokef, the prayer that we're going to say immediately after Yizkor, it's a prayer that shows us that life hangs in this delicate balance when it asks the question, Mi yichye umi yamut? Who will live and who will die? And it's not to be morbid. It's to remind us. It's to inspire us that whatever length of days we are blessed with and given with those we love, try if you can not to waste a second of it. And to ask ourselves on this day of forgiveness too. What anger am I still holding on to? What grudges? What resentments? What silly comment that I took the wrong way can I just not let go of that's keeping me in my relationships with people who are really, really important to me from healing? What will it take for me at the start of this year to turn to someone with love again or forgiveness again? Someone who means something to me. And if tomorrow they were gone, how would I feel? If my last words to them were words of anger, that's heavy stuff. But it's for a really serious day. And that's what this time is all about. We should take it seriously. Maybe you've heard the story of a grandson who looks up and sees that his grandfather every morning for years wakes up, picks a fresh wildflower, and goes on a morning walk and takes that flower to the grave of his wife, the grandmother who had passed away. And the grandson is inspired. And so he decides, after being so inspired by that beautiful gesture, to go with him on that walk one morning to see her there at her grave. And as the grandfather places the flower down on her stone, the grandson looks up at him. And he says, "It's so beautiful that you take this time, that you do that every day." And the grandfather just looks down and shakes his head, and he says, "Yeah, it is. But still I wish that I had picked for her a fresh flower every morning while she was alive. I know she would have loved that." It's been said that the saddest words you can offer in the English language are, "It might have been." And Yom Kippur asks us to reflect very critically and very deeply on the opportunities that we have to offer our love in this world before someone is gone, and to not, if we can, take a single moment for granted if we can help it. The reality is, though, I know it, and you know it too. It really doesn't matter how much time you have with the people you love. All of us, always, we wish there could be more. A moment, a year, a decade, a lifetime. It doesn't make a difference. We always wish there were more. Maybe you know the end of the holiday season is Shmini Atzeret, that extra 8th day. It's the day in our tradition that God decides to linger a little more with the Jewish people out of love for the Jewish people. Because just like when you visit someone who you really care about and you don't want to leave and you make every excuse to stay, that's how God feels about us, and that's how we feel about those who are gone, about those who we wish we could just have another day or another month or another moment with to share our love again. It says in tradition, Ki azah kemavet ahava, that love is a force which is strong as death. Love is a force which is as strong as death. It doesn't mean that love can prevent death. It means that love lives on despite the loss in ways that are beautiful and profound if we let it, in ways that will continue to touch our lives for the good, and that love is a force which lives on hopefully in the lives of those who one day will be sitting here and then standing here, remembering each and every one of us. Yizkor is the blessing of that love. We hold space for them today. It's as if we save a seat for them today to feel their presence again, though we are saddened by their absence. I ask you, how many seats are you saving today, and who are the people you loved who once filled them? What were they like? What was it they taught you? What was it they inspired you to do in life? What songs did they love? What quotes did they share? How are you reminded today of why you love them so much? For me, it's two grandparents, Michael on my father's side and Marvin on my mother's side. The two M names from which our 7-month-old Max gets his name. Michael Dermer, who was a lover of history, a hard-working man who helped support his family by working on their dairy farm in New Jersey. He was working so hard he couldn't even go to school a lot of the time. He was a boxer and a fighter, and he never stopped fighting, especially for Israel. He learned all that he could, though he never visited Israel, about the land. He was a proud Zionist. I take that from him. And Marvin Rappaport, on my mother's side, was very different. College educated, savvy, not a religious man at all, though he loved Jewish culture. He thought that I would follow in his footsteps and go on to law school, but when he found out that I was headed to rabbinical school, we shared a moment where we agreed that there are a lot of good lawyers in the world, but not enough great rabbis. And he was proud to know that I would somehow carry on the traditions and the customs of our people for the next generation in a way that he hadn't through his life. Those are the seats, just some of them, that we save every holiday. Who has a place at your table? Will you tell their stories as you break your fast tonight around the table with family members? I hope you will. You know, at our table, we're blessed with a really beautiful new addition. And there's always new additions. Grandchildren, children, or new friends, or nieces, or nephews. Those who we pray will honor the ones whose names that they take and honor the ones who came before them through all the values that they make alive again in this world. The ones who we look to because we know one day will be absent from those chairs around the table, and they'll be sitting in the place where we once sat, telling our stories and remembering our love. You know that when someone has passed away, we sit Shiva. And our tradition at Shiva for those who mourn is not to sit in a normal chair, but to sit low by the ground on a very uncomfortable box or a very uncomfortable chair. And it's a tradition of acknowledging, through that act of sitting, the very uncomfortable, the very painful feeling that loss carries with it, the pain that just hurts the heart, and contrary to what some may tell you, that doesn't go away so quickly. And yet, as uncomfortable as those Shiva chairs are, they serve a purpose. Don't they lift us up ever so slightly off the ground? That's what this moment of Yizkor is really all about. Today, together as a community, we have lost as a people, we have lost. We will, each of us tonight, I know, look to those empty chairs in our homes with hearts that are full, and with all that emotion and all that love and all of that missing them still, we say these prayers today that we may lift ourselves up a little from the grief and lift each other up off the ground and lift their spirits to and celebrate all that was good about the lives that they lived and all of the good that they brought into this world, into our lives, the beauty of the space that they occupied around the table and always forever in our hearts. V'nifkadata ki yipaked moshavecha, I will remember you, though your seat is empty. In your absence, we love you. In your absence, we hear your voice. We call out to you now to share our love once more. In your absence, may we feel today and every day your presence anew.